Bumble has constantly evolved. It's one of those wonderful places that just evolves all the time. Well, there's different approaches, but essentially it comes down to having a more attuned eye. Product came into the picture because I was so discouraged by what everyone else made. People who buy the product, they get it. A lot of them get it, they understand it's different. They will pick it up and say, I love this stuff, I know it's different. I would say that Sassoon was a revolution in hairdressing. We're the evolution of that. My name is Michael Gordon. I started Bumble and Bumble in 1977 in New York City. I'd started my career in 1966 in London as a young apprentice hairdresser. My mother decided, I think I was probably about 7 or 8 years old, to become it's a lifelong dream of hers to become a hairdresser, and she fortunately inherited enough money to go to hairdressing school and buy a small salon near where we lived. So hairdressing became very natural and normal because it was go to school, get off the school bus, say hi to mum. Then gradually I started hanging out because I liked it. You know, it was full of women, a lot of fuss and attention, and they tipped you, you know, if you were, you know, doing things. I was too small to wash hair, but I could hand pins and rollers. So I was pretty comfortable in it, and that would have been late 50s, as early as that I actually started hanging out in salons. The time I started hairdressing in the 60s was actually very interesting because it was the exact point where the old was old and the new was new, and it was very exciting. At 15 years old, you don't fully comprehend all the change because for you it's quite normal. But I was faintly aware that I'd chosen to train in an old school place. It was called Rene of Mayfair. It was very, very traditional, very highbrow, and the techniques, frankly, were old. They were classical, and the new had already happened. Vidal Sassoon had already rocked the world of fashion and beauty and of hairdressing, and we did not do that kind of work where I worked. It was very, very different. I was learning old school when everyone else was new school. Sassoon is already the place to be. I was probably out of the 1,000 people becoming a hairdresser that week. I went left and everyone went right. So I come to this place and it's really like, it's so intimidating, I can't even describe it to you. And all the women were fantastic and they're all rich and there's all these Rolls Royces rolling up. I'm like 15, you know, and my friends are at school. So, you know, I'm red every 3.5 seconds. It's like there's a manager in a suit, and there's 3 boy assistants, and the rest were women. And it was a pretty grand place. I must have been at Rene for probably 1.5 years. While unremarkable in my talent, I had a great work ethic, and I was now assisting Rene. That was considered a big privilege. So I'd been doing that for a few months, and then this Frenchman called Claude Pagliani, he told me later that he was actually a count. I have no idea whether he was a count or he wasn't a count. Fantasy and reality weren't really any different to Claude. So Claude, as it turns out, was a famous protege of Monsieur Antoine, Rene had been after him for years, trying to get him to come and work for him. And Rene was very happy because he'd got his star at last. So Claude shows up, and as a gesture of appreciation, he gave Claude me as his assistant. So Claude was just a completely different world. Even though he wasn't really much taller than me, he managed to always look down at me and sort of insult me as an English peon. Or when actually been particularly unpleasant to me. He'd never apologize, but he'd either give me money or a gift. So at one point, he gave me a gift, and he gave me these jade and gold cufflinks with ruby in the middle, which I still have. So actually, it was shortly before he left London to go to America. That was a big lesson, I suppose. He was educating me as to what taste was, as to what a good eye was, as to the fuller aspects of life that a boy from the suburbs probably wouldn't have known. After I'd left Rene at 18, 3 years of training, I then learned how to cut hair somewhere else. But I didn't really get taught how to cut hair. I got the job because I was the strange one that could actually style hair when everyone else could only cut hair. So they didn't ask me if I could cut hair. They just saw me do long hair and say, wow. And it was, people like, young people don't know how to do that. Went home, cut my mother's hair, and it was, I knew how to cut hair, more or less, the mechanics of it. So I was ready. My first idea when I came to New York was, it sounds absurd now, and it probably sounded even more absurd at the time, but I'd bought a very decrepit looking salon on Hairdressers Row. Hairdressers Row was 57th Street in Manhattan. Once I bought this place and we had 3 or 4 staff, I said to them, my goal is to make this the best salon in America. I think they were either stunned or polite enough not to burst out laughing, and they actually showed up for work. And I'm not even sure if I was serious. I just thought, well, that's a worthy goal, and it's hard enough to achieve. So, it sounds reasonable. Originally, it was horrible. It was just horrible. I hired this architect, and it was kind of a nightmare. It was mid-'80s, and we sort of got this. There was a great, we did it a great disservice, a great Italian movement called Memphis. Design movement, and somehow we ended up with this sort of horrible version of Memphis, but it was somewhere between beautiful Milanese design and really bad Miami design. We had that, and I think there was Miami Vice was on TV, so I was in my Miami Vice stage, and the colors were horrible, and it was really pretty awful because it was really a nice space, and I think we'd ruined it. I was told by some wise people that you needed PR. So we didn't have a budget for PR, so I did the next best things, and I went to magazines and lobbied beauty editors, pitching myself as a worthy talent, that I could cut hair, style hair, do what they needed. Unfortunately, that was a little bit different at those times. You were usually one or the other. You didn't usually have an idea how to do commercial hair that was good enough to be photographed. It was either horribly hairdo-y or hair magazine-y, or it was an editorial stylist, and most of those weren't in salons anymore. So I was fortunate enough to get a break, and I got on a roll that way.
We are on West 57th Street in front of Bumble & Bumble, the salon that gets the most editorial coverage in New York City. Let's go inside and visit with Michael.
I think most hairdressers don't understand publicity. They don't understand what it can do, and they think it's more magical and glamorous than it is, What I'm doing is I'm going to editors with story ideas, and I'll say, hey, look, the barbs are what's right. right now, and they're right for America, and the timing's right, and this is how you can do it, and this is 6 different ways we can do it, and this is how you can use perms in them, and this is, you know, different cutting techniques, you know. But it's very, somehow there's a blend there. It's not too much hairdresser language. Do you know what I mean? I mean, beauty editors don't really want to hear a lot of hairdressing language. They don't understand it.
We always had an editorial side, meaning I would always wanted a team of people that were doing magazine work, because I felt that they were the race car drivers in essence. They were doing things faster and to more subtlety to what they did, which I felt would give us an edge, and it always has. First of all, it created publicity, created a following in the world, got our name out there, and became a very important part of why we created product in the first place. In the beginning, the editorial was exciting because it was, I mean, I was the brand maven. I was the guy out there, you know, meeting beauty editors and championing Bumble. I mean, it was a one-man show. Obviously, as you start growing, you really have to make choices about what you can do. And I realized at some point we needed more people to do that, and we started having a team of people that we called our editorial team. There's a different kind of skill than just cutting hair. So that's where the birth of the editorial team came in. And I used to take great pride in seeing Bumble's name in an increasing array of magazines, nationally and internationally. You just get a great kick out of seeing, you know, in French Vogue, a hair credit by Bumble. Razor cutting, which I'm sure, pioneered and brought back to being a highly respected form of cutting hair, that happened towards the end of the 80s, maybe 88. I'd met Howard McLaren in London, who was a young hairdresser working at Tony and Guy, and I'd spotted him, and I was introduced to him by Anthony, and I kind of said a couple of words. I could see he was talented, just knew. I was a very good talent scout, a bit like being a a sports scout, I could just pick it up. And I said, hey, what are you doing with the rest of your life? And he thought that was an odd question. But somehow it resonated. He never really forgot it. So approximately a year later, after he left, went to Paris, he called me up and said, oh, I want to come to New York. So after I'd hired Howard, I started showing him photographs from the 30s and 40s of these beautiful, beautiful shapes, just really just these sublime bobs. And we concluded that they were done with a razor, because they just couldn't have been done with a pair of scissors. You could see there was a kind of seamless flow in the hair that just wasn't possible, yet it was very strong, very powerful. And so Howard had got fascinated by it, and he'd seen some razor cutting in Paris, which was very inspiring, but kind of what you call very creative, without much form. So he started practicing and taking the classical form, what we'd call the geometric approach, and using razor instead. And that's how we sort of came to the razor bob, which we'd call our iconic image. I'd always been one of those people that I wasn't dissatisfied, but I was always looking ahead. It was always about growing. It wasn't like there was a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. It was just the way I was built. I just always thought to grow. By 1985, 84, the salon original one on 57th Street was insane. I mean, it was fun. It was just wall-to-wall people. It was just, people were everywhere. It was so crowded. So we needed a bigger place. Nothing seemed to work out. Then we found this incredible old carriage house, ex-carriage house on 56th Street. We took a lease for what was called politely the lower level. It was the basement and the first floor. So we had 2 floors. And we went from 2,000 square feet to 6,000 or 7,000. It was a big jump. When we decided to make products, I thought, this place doesn't look right. So we went for an initial makeover, more of a facelift. And then, so ironically, I was sort of sketching things on napkins and kind of like playing in my head with what we could do, because we'd now sort of taken the whole building. The second floor we gradually took, and then we took the 3rd floor. The model agency moved out. So we had essentially 4 floors, and it was all amazing, but it seemed quite separate. It didn't seem cohesive, So I'm sort of fantasizing, literally imagining how we can make this into one whole building. And I suppose one of those wonderful acts of fate, we had a fire. So, in the space of a couple of hours, we had pretty much a blank canvas. We had no business either, but the building was devastated. Emotionally, I was trying to convey that it was one huge building. Obviously had hair cutting, coloring. We were still doing a lot of photo shoots there. We had our own dark room. We already had a beginning of an art department, which was very unusual. And our office was, was the typical, we had the accounting, but we were beginning to have a creative side that was less usual. And visually, it was much, much more architectural and very, quite industrial looking. We started making products in the early 90s, and again, it wasn't really a big idea. I think I was less passionate and more resigned to the fact that after consulting for so many hair companies and realizing that all the great hairdressers in the world that I thought were great, the people doing all the wonderful editorial work, and our own hairdressers weren't using what you would call professional hair products very much. I decided in my kind of English way, well, I think we'll just make some. There was no plan of whatsoever, no business plan. There was not even a thought except we'll make great products. That seemed really a normal idea, but it was, in retrospect, not so common because that wasn't what everyone else was doing. Although I'd consulted for a lot of companies, I hadn't really taken much notice of the business per se, except I realized that it was based on a distributor relationship. You made product, you sold it to distributors around the country, and then they essentially promoted it and sold it for you to the salons through a series of hair shows, which could be as often as every weekend. There might be a small one, and then occasionally there were the large ones. I just couldn't see us doing that. It wasn't our style to just go and do hair shows. And to try and change the whole nature of the industry, for me, I knew it wouldn't work. So again, in a sort of typically English fashion, I thought, well, there must be other people like me that admire great hairdressing and that we could share things with. So I just started calling a few people up that I knew and said, hey, you know, Peter, or hey, Scott, would you like to be involved with what we're doing? And that's how we started getting our first few accounts. The amazing thing was that nobody had ever succeeded in the direct distribution model in America. And, you know, I didn't really know enough people to be told it's a bad idea. You know, I heard a few mumbles, but again, pure instinct was, well, makes sense to me. We did it, and I was looking for special salons. We've always been very discerning in the kind of salon we want to be in business with. It very much is a partnership. So slowly we began to succeed. You know, went from 5 salons to 20 to 50 to 100. The market we were after was so small, nobody really cared, so they didn't notice that we were growing and growing until we ended up having, you know, a great reputation for having some of the best accounts in America. Well, I've been around photography, you know, obviously from the 70s because I just was, you know, in London. I'd started going on photo shoots. So I'd always liked photography, more as an observer, actually. I'd never really considered taking a picture. But then one day, it was just one of those aha. I understood how to use a camera, and I never had before. And I'm really not a technical person. But the camera, suddenly I got it, and I started taking pictures, and they were nice, they were good. And I'd always kind of supported young photographers and found young photographers to take pictures for Bumble. And sometimes it was fantastic, but it was quite an ordeal to schedule everyone's time. You're not paying them, and you've got to get the model, photographer, all the rest of it. So I started taking pictures, and with Howard pioneering Bumble's style, it gave us a chance to work together in a way that just wouldn't have happened any other way. So I think the first year we did it in my apartment. I had a lovely apartment with no furniture and great daylight. And we kept shooting at least every Monday. So as he got better and better at the definitive Bumble look, I got better at taking photographs. And I guess it was just a great way to communicate and grow something. So Howard and I started doing these makeovers, and they were great. He was doing this. He was just doing amazing haircuts. I was taking these fun makeover pictures. They were just interesting, probably because I liked the subject so much. Usually, hopefully, when you do a haircut on a person, you want the person to watch themselves and get it. They're like, wow, I look great. Now, sometimes they don't. They pretend they like it, they're not comfortable, they have to get used to it. These girls, for some reason, there wasn't that hesitation. They were just going with it, and they loved it. It was casual, we were laughing around, I was taking pictures, they were enjoying it. They were the focus of attention, of course. It was a great moment. One of the things we didn't like about most hairdressing companies was this collection thing. We were definitely anti-collection. We had an idea, and we went with the idea, and we didn't call it a collection. After 20 years of doing it, you look back and you see this very strong resemblance. One of the reasons we put together these 8 pairs of photographs was to show that the similarity. You can see the newer one, but there's definitely a strong philosophy about how things should look and the way people should look in the haircuts, and you see an evolution, but it doesn't look old-fashioned. So when I came to New York, I was pretty motivated to put up the name Bumble as fast as I could. A great graphic designer called Roy, who I knew from South Africa. Roy actually introduced me to his friend Mike Kwan, who was a New York graphic designer. And Mike designed the Bumble and Bumble logo and did this very clever thing with the comb. And we really got a lot of awards for it, graphic design awards. And I never loved it. I don't know why. I guess I just thought the comb was too obvious, but I guess I just missed the whole thing. It was really very clever. That's how the next generation of the identity of Bumble got born.
We had our first t-shirts. After the great logo, we had this disastrous one, completely my fault. Couldn't blame it on Miami Vice. I think I liked the Ferrari. I don't know what I was thinking. I was getting interested in doing products. I got referred to this great graphic design house called M & Co, created by Tibor Kalman. Alexander Brebner was working there, who was a customer of Bumble. In order to do the products, we needed to fix the salon, attend to the graphics. We did a facelift. The place looked much, much better. Even though Tibor M & Co was supposed to do the logo, they ended up not doing the logo. They ended up not doing the packaging. And Alexander had left at that point, and he did it as a freelance job. The actual BB part forced him into trying to do the Japanese thing and just using his hand and keep doing BBs. So he did, and it's fantastic. For some reason we decided that 20 versions of it was not exactly changing your logo. You could argue that, I suppose you could debate that it's against the rules of good graphic design, but it's obviously the same company, so we have many versions of it on bottles, but in fact it comes from one source. The education was actually very scary. I understood it was very important, and that was something I was actually concerned about, because I thought Sassoon was brilliant in their education, but I also understood it was based on a brilliant system that was replicable. This is how you do it, and pretty much you only do it this way, and you could teach it, and you could teach it to thousands, as they did. I mean, probably millions of hairdressers around the world. Bumble had a problem. It was very hard to define. It was more about there's an eye. We always refer to the eye, a sense of style, a kind of taste level. There was technique, but it was much less rigid. It was very much more eclectic. So teaching it was difficult for us. For us to get an assistant trained was hard work. So I was very wary of going into what I called the education business, because I didn't think we could do it. But there was catch-22, because the thing that most of the accounts wanted from us, craved, was more education, because when we would actually do our little hair events, or we'd go on the road, I mean, people were just floored, and in some cases pretty much changed their businesses to try and absorb more of what we were doing. University is 2 floors, and we called it a university. It's not entirely tongue-in-cheek. It's quite serious. We said if we call it a university, we have to take it much more seriously, and we have to constantly improve the curriculum, the training, the way that we teach, and the way that the teachers learn themselves. It's divided into 2 schools. There's a business school and there's a technical school. The actual, what you call the real university floor, is on the 3rd floor. It's the largest floor, and it has the auditorium, it has classrooms, it has a library, it has breakout areas. And then on the 6th floor is the technical school, where there's stations. It's a pretty great looking school. And that's where people come to practice and learn. There used to be this great event called Hair Color USA. And I said, look, maybe let me come and I'll take pictures of all these hairdressers. Vidal Sassoon was going to be there, Luis Longueras, etc., etc. So Howard and I, typical style, marched down there, organized a huge canvas backdrop on the beach. We took these pictures. Got Vidal laughing and joking, and he was fantastic, with Annie Humphreys and with Tim Hartley, because they were doing a hair show. And we got Luis and Vidal, so on and so forth, and they were pretty great. So then we auctioned them later on. We made these beautiful prints,
and people bought them. And at the auction, the idea came. Suddenly it was in Hair Heroes. Suddenly thought, oh, great, do a book. So we met Jean Shakov and Sidney Gieleroff. So that was a great start with these really great interviews, and I managed to photograph them. And it became this kind of obsession every year of like, I have to finish this book, I have to finish this book. But finally I forced myself to finish the book. And then of course, the book came out, it was pretty great. It's very much part of Bumble culture now because it's become something we've done as a group that nobody else has done or would do. Something I think we all feel proud of. It's my hope and desire that through this book and through Bumble and Bumble University, we can continue the legacy of these people. We were growing, and in fact, we'd grown so much that the office, the business office, had expanded to a point where we had to take additional space. So now we had the salon and some of the office at the original Bumble, and then down the street we had a whole new floor of corporate offices, we'd call them, and we had our own sales team, so which was unusual. And that was not just getting crowded, but I was feeling a disconnect. It was feeling, well, just a disconnect. So I started daydreaming about adding, because I knew that the building we were in had this available, they call them air rights, space above your head. So I was imagining how we might, and talking to architects about how we might buy the building and then with the air rights perch something on the top. Sounds crazy. Or worst case, knock it down, find somewhere to go for a year and then come back. In 2000, we'd become partners with Estee Lauder. Estee Lauder had invited me to this sort of executive camp that they ran in Oxford, England, the famous college there, sort of like summer camp for big kids. And I went there, and I was the only entrepreneur. Everybody else was in marketing, or they worked in the makeup and skincare brands, and it was an international event. And the day we arrived, they said, your project for the week is everybody gets a project, or each team, we were in little teams, there was maybe 40 of us, had to present a plan for growing the business. So in my group, everyone said, well, you'll do Bumble, right? Sure. So I had to attend all these lectures every day and then prepare this pitch, which was going to be to the president of the company on the Friday. So Friday came and I did my pitch, and I'd basically drawn this sort of rickety looking tall building with all the bits of Bumble in it. It was fortuitously a vision of the House of Bumble. And I was trying to explain, because there were people from all around the globe, that the way to create a market for Bumble in other countries was to get them to feel the emotion and the energy and the passion. And it was a hairdressing company. It was not a sales marketing company. It was a true hairdressing company that we had to appeal to the best hairdressers around the world. So I made my pitch. It was 20 minutes. Fred Langhammer, who was the president of the Lauder, was looking, and I could see him smiling and sort of nodding the head the right way. And that was pretty much what I went back to him with a few months later and said, this is my plan for the future of Bumble, and we need to be in one place, and we need to have a salon, because that's the soul of the company. We need to have a school, which was going to become a university. And we need to have the whole product company, because it's a creative company. Unlike most companies, we have not just our own art department, product development, marketing, film department, PR, sales. So it's important that everybody's together in the same building. And that's how this House of Bumble came to be. When we'd built this place and you know, this is such an incredible surprise because we're in arguably the trendiest part of New York right now, for good or for bad, for better or for worse. And people are just so not expecting to come to a hair company and see 50,000 square feet of people, you know, I mean, and in such an inspiring place, and the university blows them away. I don't know, I just calling it what's the House of Bumble. So it's kind of a way of keeping us reminding ourselves that it's a integrated business where everybody is important, and we're much more powerful together.
When I was given the go-ahead to do 30 years of Bumble for Hairstories 4, one of the first things I had to do was go back through the archives and find all these great photographs. And one of the great chapters is the 8 haircuts. And it was difficult to choose the 8 because we've got so many, but choosing 8 and doing that challenge of taking those classic simple haircuts and redoing them today was a great experience. We took a week and went through and used some of our house models, and we styled them, we cut them, we changed some of the techniques, we changed the lengths, and that was something that I think we've built on. And the school was built on these simple techniques, and that's how we allow ourselves to build haircuts out of the technique. What I want to show you is the 4 that I think have show you a wide range in some of the skills and techniques that we use through university and in our day-to-day cutting. For us, it's not about the latest haircut, it's about taking a simple haircut and applying it on a new face, a new length, and that's what's new. It's not really the haircut, but the person and the way you apply it to that person. To start the 8 cuts, I wanted to start with the classic. I went back almost 20 years to when we did the first graduated bob. Taking the razor and applying it with very technical graduation, the razor gave us a different feel. It started to almost just melt the hair into the neckline and create that softness that then became the signature for us. And I took one of our house models, Irina, and started as I would. I went through, did my subsection, started to work through. And you see, I mean, when I did the haircut 20 years ago, 20 years later, there's still the simplicity, but I've learned a lot. I've learned about weight, balance, and that's the things that we do. We take those little parts of every time you do a haircut and how you apply it to a different hairline, to a different person, make it new. She had a very cool hairline that grew into the center and a very strong hairline, and worked through removing weight with a tip. As I moved through to the sides, it's quite a short, almost like a little box bob. And at that point I took my scissors and I started to carve in the sort of stronger lines through the side in front of the ear, just to keep that very tight, because she's got a slightly wavy texture. And moved through it and then came over the top of that with the razor again, because the combination with the strength of the scissor and then the looseness of the razor and the softness of the razor just gave me that great texture, as you see, as we get through the front. And cut quite a strong little fringe in the front, and finished off, started putting the products in it, and we worked through, obviously with the brilliantine as it was, the product that really helped us develop that finishing and the texture of the haircut, and helped us to see the separation and the beauty of what the razor did, and finished off. And then went through and did a couple of other styles just to see the versatility of the haircut. And again, that's what just made it new. And every time I do a graduated bob, I've probably done a couple of thousand by now, but it's still a very exciting haircut to do. That's why we included it in our design studio as one of the main haircuts of that week. I think when you look at both the photographs together, there's quite a similarity of, obviously there's a texture in there that's created by the razor and the products, but a haircut that can stand that long. I mean, I'm not saying that this was the first ever bob that was done, but for us it's the 20-year sort of anniversary of that haircut that became our signature as a Bumble and Bumble classic graduated bob. When I did the original short back and sides, it was on this surfer kid, and he had long hair, and we gave him what we call a short back and sides. That sort of goes back to when I was growing up as a kid. It was what you would ask for at the barbers, and a lot of people call it like a schoolboy's haircut. But to recreate it, I took Cullen and sectioned it off, and I wanted something a little bit off with it, you know. So even though I was doing an undercut, I wanted neither side to be the same. So on the left-hand side was a little bit higher, where it was short to the lower on the other side. And I think when everything's so even, it tends to look a little bit too fake, if that's the right word, or too manufactured, cookie cutter type hairdressing. And went through, used my scissor over comb, classic again techniques, working up through the back and the sides, and then dropped to longer hair down. It kind of looked a bit like a farmer at that point. And the real trick here is to get that blend. And I did that by working from the center in the back and using the razor at this point to start to get that blend, because that's where the razor really can turn it on, because it will take the weight out the mid-lengths and allow the hair to sort of blend in even to that very short cropped underneath. And work to the front, and really, really simple. The thing about men's hair is it has to fit. You know, it has to, the right length. He can wear a longer length, but for some other guys, you're going to have to adjust it. So these haircuts are the idea, the simple things that we've recreated over the years, but the adjustment to the individual is what's really important. So I went through and again, styled it a couple of different ways, and again, great looking guy, the right guy for the right haircut, and that's what counts. For Bettina, this great model, short blonde hair, I went back and I'd picked out a photograph that was sort of punk and it was chic, and it was where we took larger sections and cut them much, much shorter than any other section in the head and disconnected them. It was that whole mid sort of 90s where we were taking our haircuts and seeing how far we could stretch them. Raymond actually did the original haircut, which was on this beautiful Australian girl. And I wanted to take that idea and push it for Bettina here. And the way I did that was to take sections down the curve from the recession all the way into the back, almost like a banana section. And I wanted them to disconnect the top from the side so I could keep that longer sideburn. And Victoria had just coloured her hair, we'd given her treatment, so it's quite soft. And so I went through and worked those sections out, and then started to work down from those sections into the sides and into the back. I wanted a very sort of wispy, angelic feel to it, and that was me updating the haircut to fit Bettina right there. Was that I wasn't going in with such a strong hand and such a bluntness that we had in the original haircut. And went through and just pointed out and freehand through the sides into the back and then into the top. So I wanted to do the styling. I wanted something, again, quite classy with this short haircut. For Bettina, I wanted her to look very, very sexy, so I used the Sumotech. Short hair, you can let it go, it can be fluffy and very little done to it, but when you use a product like Sumotech in it, as we have focused on for the NE classes, you get to see and push the haircut to its limit. You stretch that product through the hair and start to see the shape and the whole texture of the haircut sort of come alive. And It almost sort of seemed like a faux hawk, which is a variation of a mohawk, and that was perfect for her look and for her style. And we went through it, and then I started to use the iron on the hair and just get a little bit more of a sort of different texture with the iron, just to give it maybe even a commercial look, which to me isn't a bad word. It's actually a great word when it's done right. And as you see with Bettina's hair, just came out fantastic and a great evolution from that first. And again, a very commercial, but still had a little twist to it, which I love. One of the last things we did was the long hair, and that sort of comes from one of my sayings about hippies just as being long hairs, but this is a very chic variation of it. And the original was done by Ward, and I always loved that haircut because it just had that little tweak to the sides, a slight sideburn underneath long hair. Quite a clever idea, so I wanted to sort of pay respect to that. And I used Raquel, and before I did anything, I gave her a treatment. And it's important, quality hair is important to a hairdresser. Went through, started just very bluntly cutting in a line at the bottom. Her hair had been previously razored, so I wanted to go through and establish a bit more of a line through the base, even though it still was quite fine through the ends. I then went to the sides and did that little sideburn piece, and then finished off simply through the front with the fringe. Again, very, very strong. Probably longer than you would do if it was a client. For me, I'd like to do my clients that length and repeat the trims in between. So if you give this haircut to someone, they might be back 2 or 3 times just for the bangs before you do the overall haircut again.